Okay, good day. So this video presentation, we will going to discuss about the topic that Mr. Noel assigned to us together with my partner, Maria May Ann. I am Mary Joy as Imbien. So the flow of this video presentation, I'll I'll be the one to discuss first the half of our report, and then Maria May Ann will going to continue our report up to the last. So our topic is about the early childhood development. So the early childhood development is from period from 3 to 8 years old. So these are the child from 3 to 8 years old. So we have the stages of development. Of course, the stages of development has the stages of theories. First, they are based on qualitative changes in behavior over time and age. So the children under 3 to 8 years old, their foundation through their behavior was qualitative changes over time and age. So meaning when we say qualitative changes, their development was focused more on information rather than quantity of the children. So the next one here is they describe an invariant sequence of development. The rate may differ between the individuals, but the order is always the same. So it says here their stages of development was described by the invariant sequence. It also says here that there is a possibility that their development will be different between individuals, but the order will be the same, still the same. And then next, number 3, each stage has structural cohesiveness. So meaning here, in other words here, the description of behavior within each stage should be consistent and coherent. So the behavior of the children under 3 to 8 years old within each stage should be coherent and consistent. And then last, number 4, stages from a hierarchy because each subsequent stage in some way builds upon earlier ones. So here, it says here that stage from a hierarchy because every following or next ways is developing upon the previous ones. And then next, in early childhood, we have early childhood typical and atypical development. So what is early childhood typical and atypical development? It is an interactive distance learning course which explores contemporary best practice and perspective on early childhood development. It will also include instructional technology or IT and assistive technology or AT application of population. So, okay, it also emphasizes here the individual differences between cultural influences, and the impact of development delay and disability during infancy, toddlerhood, and the preschool years. So later on, Maria May Ann will going to discuss about those example of the infancy, toddlerhood, and preschool years in every typical and atypical development. So we see here that there is instructional technology, assistive technology, IT, and AT. So what is the IT and AT? Okay, first, the instructional technology is a specific technology field that deals with creating and resources for learning. Okay, so here there are the fields of technologies. The instructional technology, they are the fields of technologies that helps to have and to create learnings through their resources for the child to have learning and knowledge. So next, practice of design, development, utilization, management, and evaluation of process and resources of learning. So here in instructional technology, it also says here the practice the design, development of child or process, and growing of creating something over a period of time. Then also the utilization that says here, or in root word utilize. It means to use something for particular purpose of the technology. And then it's also says here that there is also management or act of dealing and making decisions. The last is we can see here the evaluation. So the evaluation is the process. So it means that there is an act of evaluating that those resources for learning. And then next is the AT or the assistive technology. Assistive technology is assistive, adaptive, and rehabilitative devices for people with disabilities or the elderly population. People who have disabilities often have difficulty performing activities of daily independently or even the assistance. So in AT, these are the devices that used by the people who has disabilities and also those elder people for them to provide aid or assistance. Adaptive for the design or intended to assist disabled persons, and also rehabilitative means to bring those people in the independently or uh, to become them for them to become in a good condition. So recently we talk about the typical and atypical development. So what is the typical and atypical development? First, the typical means that a person or thing conforms to its type. There are no surprises. All the characteristics are only what one would expect. So, in typical, parents and health practitioners often track and measure a child's developmental milestone from infancy to middle school. So, developmental milestone include physical or behavioral signs of physical, social, and cognitive process that deal to master over one's environment. So, in smiling, crawling, manipulating objects, walking, self-care, and talking are the examples of developmental milestones that provide valuable insight into a child's development. Most children develop skills in similar patterns and similar patterns at the similar times. So, but attaining milestone varies based on each child's family and personal history environment. Therefore, milestones are generally reported in age ranges rather than by a specific age. So that is the typical, no surprises at all. The development of the child is smooth. Then these are the we can see to this child what would the the people and the parent expect, because we also see this to other children. And then we also have the atypical development. So atypical development is when development doesn't follow the normal course. It could include things like learning and social disabilities and disorders. So atypical. So every child is unique. So of course, every child is unique. Each develop at his or her own pace and style. You might be concerned if your child is not yet crawling or walking when many peers are already displaying this skill. So your child become different. So, but remember that there are variations in typical development. That's why developmental milestones are noted as ranges. So, in atypical, for the parents, does your infant or child showing significant delays or different patterns of achieving major milestone? Okay, this could be a sign of a motor or movement disorder. For example, a child who cannot maintain sitting by the 10th month, or a child whose legs get very stiff every time he tries to roll over. Older children also may be displaying atypical development if they are not able to eat with utensils or dress properly and undress, or if they have trouble cutting with scissors or drawing. So that is the atypical development. So here we prepare the video about the typical development. So here it is.
Minnesota Help Me Grow. When parents know, children grow. Age 4 years. Cognitive development. A preschooler or 4-year-old's thinking and learning skills are in full bloom. An activity can hold their attention for 10 to 15 minutes, and they have developed the ability to remember many things, like parts from their favorite stories. 4-year-olds enjoy pretending and have vivid imaginations. They invent things like princesses and monsters. By 4, a child can understand concepts like big, little, tall, and short. They are able to correctly name some colors, usually red, blue, and yellow. A preschooler understands the concept of counting and is able to count out 5 objects and may recognize some numbers. A 4-year-old is capable of following 3 instructions given at the same time, such as put the toys away now, wash your hands, and come to eat. Most 4-year-olds are interested in new experiences and quite curious. They ask and answer the who, what, when, where, and why questions. Social and emotional development.
2 dogs in a house, on a boat, in the water.
Two dogs jumping in the water.
Preschoolers display more self-confidence and separate easily from their parents around 4 years. 4-year-olds enjoy playing together with other children. They are capable of taking turns, sharing, and cooperating, but disagreements still happen. Anger is expressed verbally rather than physically, and children at this age can feel jealousy. Language and communication development.
Can you put that hat on you?
Sure.
Which is the front?
That looks like a golf ball.
You can carry on quite a conversation with a 4-year-old, and she uses complete sentences and asks endless questions during the conversations. These conversations with a preschooler are often very dramatic and imaginative. 4-year-olds have learned words are powerful, and they use words to get their points across.
Show the camera your hat.
Ta-da.
Don't be surprised if some of the words your 4-year-old uses are not ones you want to hear from your child. Try not to overreact if your child utters swear words.
Right
A 4-year-old can be very bossy at times, perhaps telling you to stop talking or her playmates to come here now. Using the words please and thank you when you're talking to your child helps them learn positive social language. Large and small muscle development. A 4-year-old needs plenty of opportunities to play and exercise. These are some physical skills that a 4-year-old should be able to do. Go upstairs and downstairs without your help. Run. The running is more controlled at this age too. He can start, stop, and turn when he is running. Hop on one foot and/or balance on one foot for a few seconds. Kick a ball forward. Throw a ball overhand and catch a bounced ball most of the time. A 4-year-old's small muscle or fine motor skills have developed to the point where he can draw recognizable simple objects, copy crosses and squares, print some letters, complete simple puzzles, build a tall tower of blocks. There are several things you can do to help your 4-year-old grow and learn. Some ways you can support your child's development are to read aloud or tell stories and encourage your preschooler to look at books on his own. Encourage interest in writing and words. Provide him with paper and notebooks for writing. Print letters and numerals for him to see and copy. Provide a variety of art experiences. Sort and count everything in sight, like silverware, socks, rocks, and leaves. Talk about things being in, on.
So that is the example of and some explanation about the typical development per stages. And hey, we have also the atypical development. A video for the atypical development. So here it goes.
Some signs that your 3-year-old may be developmentally delayed include if they're not walking, if they're not talking. At this age, 75% of their speech should be understood. So if you are not understanding half of what they're saying, that's cause for concern. If your child is not engaged, which means if they're not looking at you, if they're not responding to you, if you're not able to have them follow simple instructions, if they're not pointing to objects that they know, that is cause for concern. If ever your child loses a skill that they once had, things like they were able to talk to you and say simple phrases and now no longer do that, that is cause for concern. And lastly, anytime you feel that something may be off and you have that gut reaction and there's an instinct that something may be off with my child, don't delay. Speak with your child's pediatrician and share with him or her your concerns for your child's development. And they will tell you whether or not there's cause for concern.
So that is the video about the atypical development. She says here about the about walking and talking, the different between those other children. So she also gave some suggestion on what should the parents can do for their children. So Maria, we're going to continue the discussion.
So, as explained by Miss Imbien about our topic, typical and atypical development, when we say typical, it is the expected performance or actions that a child has. When we say it's atypical, it is the opposite, meaning the actions that are expected cannot be performed and can be result in some conditions like disorders. So let's start from having the social and emotional development of a 4-year-old child. In the age of 4, a child is expected to learn how to cooperate and interact with other children. That was the typical 4-year-old child. A typical child is expected to learn interacting with other people through playing and interacting with other children. While in a typical development of a 4-year-old child, he or she tend to ignore the other person he doesn't know or outside of their family. In terms of language and communication, a typical child knows some basic rules of grammar, like the use of he and she, and he can also sing a song from his or her memory through singing nursery rhymes. He can be also able to tell stories from her memory and say or tell his or her first name and last name that was frequently asked by other people. But when it comes to the atypical, a child speaks unclearly and doesn't use the me and you. He can't even retell the favorite story because he is being confused of what he or she is saying. When it comes to the cognitive development or the learning, thinking, and problem solving, A child can name some colors and numbers. He also understands the idea of counting, stands to understand the time, remembers a part of the story, understand the idea of same and different. He can also draw a person with 2 to 4 body parts. He can also use scissors, starts to copy capital letters, plays board or card games, tells you what he thinks, what he is going to happen in the next, in a book. So, but when I say atypical, he generally loses skills along the way instead of improving. So, he doesn't follow the 3-part commands. He can't even retell a favorite story, doesn't understand the same and different, and has no interest with playing games or activities. Lastly, the movement and physical development of a 4-year-old child. So, as a typical child, he can hop and stand on one foot up to 2 seconds, but in atypical, he can even jump in another place. So, he also catches a bounce ball most of the time, pours, cuts with supervision, and mashes own food. It can be done in supervision with guardian or parents. And lastly, he has trouble in skipping as a part of atypical development. So let's move to the 5 years old of age of early childhood, the social and emotional. Again, the typical and atypical development. At the age of 5, a typical child wants to please and to be liked by friends. While in atypical, they are usually not active or usually withdrawn by their friends. So, they more likely agree to rules like to sing and dance and act, which I also did before when I was young. They are also aware of gender, which is male and female. They can tell what's real and make believe, especially in stories, and shows more independence. Is sometimes demanding and sometimes very cooperative, while in atypical development, they can tell what's real and make believe. They shows wide range behaviors, usually fearful or aggressively sudden. Next is the language and communication of a 5-year-old child. So when it comes to the language and communication, a typical child can speak clearly, tells a simple story using full sentences, using future tense, for example, grandma will be here. But when it comes to atypical, he or she doesn't want to talk about daily activities. He prefers to not to share it with other people. And he also doesn't use plural or past tense properly. So, when it comes to the cognitive, a 5-year-old child in a typical development can say his name and address. He can also count 10 or more things. Can draw a person with at least 6 body parts, but easily distracted in atypical development. He can also give first and last name and loses skills along the way. In additional to its typical development, he can copy geometric shapes like triangle, rectangles, squares, and other geometric shapes, and knows about things used every day, like money and food. So because the typical age of a kindergarten is 5 years old, a kindergarten should know some basic rules or some basic skills about doing such things for him to be able to step in the next level. Because we can say a child has a typical development when he or she loses skills along the way. Instead of improving, he or she doesn't like to draw or play games or activities, usually distracted. But when it comes to their movement and physical development, a typical child can stand on one foot for 10 seconds or longer and hops and may be able to skip. He can do a somersault like it is the acrobatic movement like we always do when we are young, when we are a kid. And also knows how to use a fork and spoon and sometimes a table knife. So just for a while, I remember that I just started using fork when I was high school because I thought that it was just a hindrance for me to eat properly. So next, a 5-year-old child can use the toilet on her own and can do swings and climbs into the playground. While in its atypical development, he can brush his teeth or her teeth, wash and dry hands, or get undressed without help. He always needs the help of other people, especially his parents. So let's move to the 6 to 8 years old in early childhood. Its typical development can be showing independence from parents and family, understands about his or her place in life or in the world, can pay more attention to friendships and teamwork, and wants to be liked and be accepted by friends. While its atypical development plays best with younger children, that is not normal. So starts to think about the future. On its typical development. So in terms of language and communication, it is atypical for a child to speak only in 2 to 3 word sentences, even in his native language. When it comes to thinking and learning, he or she is more smart or smarter and develop his or her sharp mind to telling stories and to express his or her feelings. And this is also the stage when he or she start to have more concern for other people. And it is atypical for them to only follow single step directions and can occasionally label what this is. Also, this is the stage where a child has to enter the needs of a modified curriculum at school and because he has a low IQ. And a child also needs a small group or one-on-one instruction at school. Lastly, when we talk about the movement and physical development, it is a typical development for a 6 to 8 years old child to need a physical help with taking a bath and brushing a teeth. And it is also atypical for them to have physical delay in activities like catching a ball and hopping, because as a child they tend to move fast and they have to learn basic skills in such playing sports activities. So I hope you have learned a lot and understand what the typical and atypical development is. Thank you for listening and God bless.